It was 2:07 a.m. when my phone lit up. One name, one short line. Alex Monroe. Need help. You awake? We weren't friends. We never shared anything outside the fluorescent walls of the office. He was the kind of boss who didn't waste words, didn't indulge in casual smiles, didn't let anyone close enough to see the edges of him. That's why I stared at the screen longer than I should have. It didn't make sense. It didn't sound like him. Before I could even type a reply, there was a knock at my door. 3 quiet knocks. The kind you make when you're not sure if you even deserve to be let in. When I opened the door, he was standing there. No explanations, no trace of the man who ran meetings with surgical precision. His eyes weren't sharp tonight. They were somewhere else entirely, unfocused, tired in a way I'd never seen. Can I? He started, then stopped. The rest of the sentence never came. I stepped aside. He walked past me like someone who had just decided he couldn't stand the weight of his own footsteps anymore. He didn't sit right away. He stood in the middle of the room, hands loose at his sides, as if he didn't know where they were supposed to be. Finally, he lowered himself onto the couch and stared straight ahead at nothing. I couldn't be alone tonight. It wasn't loud. It wasn't directed at me. It sounded like something he was telling himself. There was no anger in his voice, no command, just absence. Like a wall had been pulled away and there was nothing holding him up anymore. I asked if he wanted water. He nodded, but when I handed it to him, he didn't drink. Just held the glass, eyes fixed somewhere far away. Rough night. I tried. He didn't look at me. Rough year. Alex Monroe didn't talk like that. At work, he spoke in numbers, timelines, bullet points. He didn't deal in confessions. I felt like I'd stumbled into a room I was never meant to see. I didn't push him. Not yet. I just sat at the other end of the couch, close enough that he'd know he wasn't alone, far enough that he could keep whatever space he needed. Minutes passed in silence. The kind of silence that feels like it might crack if you breathe too hard. You ever feel like you've built your whole life so nothing can touch you, he said suddenly, and then one night you realize it's all paper thin? It wasn't a question that wanted an answer, so I didn't give one. He exhaled, slow, heavy, and leaned forward, elbows on his knees, fingers pressed together like he was holding himself in place. I shouldn't have come here, he murmured. Then why did you? This time he looked at me, and in that glance, I saw something I hadn't even known I was looking for. It wasn't weakness. It wasn't defeat. It was raw, unfiltered truth. Because you're the only person I know who won't ask me to be someone else. The words hit harder than they should have. Not because of what they meant, but because of who they came from. Alex Monroe, the man who could shut down a room with a single look, was sitting in my living room telling me, without quite saying it, that he didn't know how to carry the weight anymore. I didn't know if I was supposed to respond. I didn't know if I was supposed to tell him it would be okay, or if that would just make it worse. So I stayed quiet. Sometimes quiet is the only answer that makes sense. He didn't stay long. Maybe 20 minutes. Long enough for the air in the room to change. Long enough for me to see him not as the man at the head of the conference table, but as a person with edges frayed from holding too much in for too long. When he finally stood, he paused at the door, one hand on the handle. I don't know what I needed tonight, he said. Maybe I just needed to be seen. Maybe that's enough, I replied. He nodded once, almost imperceptibly, and left. No dramatic exit. No last glance. Just gone. I sat there for a while after, trying to piece together why it felt like something had shifted, like I'd been handed something fragile I wasn't sure I knew how to hold. The truth was, it didn't feel like a work thing anymore. It didn't even feel like a friendship thing. It felt like the first crack in a wall that had been standing for years. And once you see a crack, you can't unsee it. 3 days passed before I saw him again. No messages. No calls. No late-night knocks. Just work in all its usual noise. Meetings that felt longer than they were, hallway encounters where his eyes slid past mine like we'd never shared anything outside those walls. I told myself I'd imagine it all, that the night he came over was nothing more than an accident of timing and exhaustion. I almost convinced myself until Thursday night. The knock came just before midnight. 2 short taps, then 1 long. Not urgent, not casual, just deliberate enough that I knew it was him. When I opened the door, Alex stood there like he had the first time. No coat, no preamble. But his eyes, they weren't as lost. More like he'd been circling the decision to come here all day and only now let himself follow through. "You busy?" he asked. "No." He stepped inside without another word. This time, he didn't pace or stand in the center of the room like a guest who wasn't sure he belonged. He went straight to the couch, sat down at one end, and waited. I sat at the other. For a while, we didn't speak. It wasn't awkward. The silence didn't demand to be filled. It just existed, like we were both holding on to it for the same reason. Finally, he said, "I don't know how to explain this without sounding ridiculous. Try me." He looked at me, not long enough to make it intense, but long enough to make it clear he meant every word. "I feel safe here." It wasn't the kind of thing you expect from a man like Alex Monroe. He could walk into a room full of executives and not flinch. But here in my apartment, that armor wasn't even on the floor. It was gone entirely. "I can't remember the last time I felt that way," he added, his voice lower now, like it wasn't meant for the world outside these walls. I didn't answer right away. Part of me was afraid that if I said something too fast, the moment would break. So I just nodded. The quiet returned. But it was different this time, warmer, less fragile. We weren't testing it anymore. We were letting it hold us up. And then, just as it settled, the knock came. Sharp. Too loud for this hour. Alex's body went rigid instantly, like a reflex. He didn't even turn toward the door, just froze, his shoulders drawn tight. I got up slowly, already guessing who it was. When I opened the door, there he was, Mr. Collins, the neighbor from across the hall. Retired, chatty, the kind of man who never learned the difference between friendly and intrusive. "Everything all right in here?" he asked, leaning past the doorway, just enough to get a look inside. "Yeah, just late night," I said, keeping my tone light. His gaze flicked over my shoulder. "That your boss?" The way he said it wasn't mean, but it wasn't innocent either. Before I could answer, Alex stood. His face was blank, but I could see the strain in the way he held himself, like one wrong word might split open a wound he'd spent years stitching shut. "Nice to meet you," Collins added, smiling like it was harmless small talk. Alex gave the smallest nod, then glanced at me, a silent signal that this needed to end. I closed the door quickly. For a moment, neither of us spoke. He stood where he was, hands in his pockets, staring at the floor. "Sorry," I said, though I wasn't sure what for. He shook his head. "It's not you. I just hate that feeling." "What feeling?" "Being seen when you're not ready to be. Having someone think they know your story before you've decided to tell it." There was weight in his voice now, heavier than before. "I've been through this before," he continued quietly. "Years ago, people assuming, whispering, deciding who I was before I even had the chance to figure out myself. It's like once they think they know, they stop seeing anything else." The way he said it made it clear that this wasn't about one neighbor at the wrong time. This was about every moment he'd been made to feel small, different, judged. "I'm not ashamed," he said after a pause. "But I'm not ready to give anyone else pieces of this before I understand it myself." I didn't push. Didn't tell him Collins probably meant nothing by it. Because I could see in his eyes that this was bigger than a late-night interruption. It was a ghost from years back, pulled into the room without warning. "Then no one else has to know," I said simply. Something in his posture loosened. Not much, but enough. We sat back down. The quiet came again, but this time it carried something heavier between us. A kind of trust that doesn't get built in the daylight. When he finally stood to leave, he didn't look like he had the first night, lost and adrift. But he also didn't look untouched. Whatever this was, it was pressing against walls he'd kept sealed for a long time. At the door, he paused. "You don't have to fix anything," he said. "I'm not trying to." "Good," he replied, "because I'm not ready for that. I just don't want to feel like I'm standing in the open with no way to hide." I nodded. "Then we'll keep the walls where you want them." He gave the faintest smile, and for the first time that night, his shoulders eased just a little. When the door closed behind him, the room felt different, not empty, just quieter in a way that lingered. And I knew that silence had started to mean something to both of us. The change wasn't loud. It was subtle enough that no one else noticed, but I felt it in every clipped email, every quick hallway pass without a glance. Alex had gone cold again. Not angry, not hostile, just untouchable. like the door that had cracked open between us had been shut and locked from the inside. Meetings became mechanical. He addressed me the way he addressed everyone else. Efficient, neutral, stripped of anything personal. The warmth of those nights, the quiet that had meant more than words, was gone. At first, I thought maybe I'd done something wrong. Maybe I'd crossed some invisible line, made the silence too heavy, let him get too comfortable. But then I remembered the look in his eyes when Collins had shown up at my door. This wasn't about me. It was about the walls he'd spent years perfecting, and the fact that they'd been breached. I tried to let it go, tried to convince myself that whatever had happened between us was just a small detour, not a destination. But every time I caught him looking away a fraction too quickly or leaving a room the moment I entered, it felt less like coincidence and more like retreat. 2 weeks passed. No late-night knocks. No messages. Until one Friday evening, when I stayed late at the office to finish a report. The floor was quiet, most of the lights off. His office door was closed, but through the glass, I saw him leaning over his desk, one hand pressed to his temple like he was trying to hold something in place. I knocked lightly. He didn't answer, but he didn't tell me to leave either. Long day, I asked, stepping inside. He didn't look up. Long month. I wanted to say more, but before I could, there was a sound from the hallway. Footsteps quick and close. The door opened without warning. It was Karen from HR, holding a stack of files. She froze when she saw me in his office. Her eyes darted between us, curiosity flickering for just a moment before she masked it with a polite smile. Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt. Alex straightened instantly, his entire posture changing in a heartbeat. It's fine, he said, voice sharp enough to cut off any follow-up questions. Karen handed him the files, said something about Monday's meeting, and left. The silence that followed was heavier than anything we'd sat through before. He didn't look at me. You should go. It wasn't cold, but it was final. I wanted to argue. Wanted to tell him Karen hadn't seen anything, that she probably didn't care. But I saw the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw was set. This wasn't about what had just happened. It was about what it reminded him of. The neighbor. The questions. The way people can take 2 seconds of seeing something they don't understand and spin it into a story that lasts years. I left without another word. Over the weekend, I kept thinking about the way his voice had shifted the moment someone else had stepped into the room. It wasn't embarrassment. It was defense. On Monday, things were back to normal, if you could call it that. Polite nods, brief exchanges, the kind of professional distance you could measure with a ruler. But that night, just after 11, I heard another knock. Not at my apartment door, at the door to the building's stairwell. I'd gone down to get the mail late, and when I pushed it open, Alex was there. No suit, no briefcase, just standing in the dim light, looking like he'd been debating whether to come up for the last hour. Needed some air, he said. I stepped aside. We walked up together, neither of us speaking until we reached my floor. Inside, the quiet between us felt almost like it had before, comfortable, but edged with something unsaid. He sat down, leaned forward, and let out a slow breath. That day at the office, when Karen walked in, it hit me harder than it should have. I stayed still, waiting. I've had people decide who I am based on the smallest moments. A look, a word, someone showing up where they didn't expect me to be. And once they decide, you can't change it. You just live with whatever version of you they've created. It wasn't a confession. It was a wound reopening. I didn't pull back because I don't trust you, he said. I pulled back because I don't trust what people do when they think they know your life. I didn't tell him it wasn't fair or that not everyone thought like that, because I knew enough to understand that this wasn't paranoia. It was experience. So I said the only thing that felt true. You don't have to explain, but you also don't have to go through it alone. For a moment, he just looked at me, like he was weighing whether that was something he could allow himself to believe. And then, without saying anything else, he nodded. Not an agreement exactly, but an acknowledgement. The silence came back, but it wasn't empty. It carried the weight of everything we hadn't said, and everything we might, if he ever found the space to let it out. It was a Tuesday night when a knock came again. Not hesitant this time, steady, deliberate. When I opened the door, Alex was standing there, hands in his pockets, the kind of posture that said he'd already rehearsed what he was about to do. "I've been thinking," he said, without waiting for an invitation. He stepped inside, turned, and faced me with a seriousness that made the air feel heavier. "I know I've been distant. I've been trying to keep space between us." I didn't answer, because if I didn't, I knew I'd cross some invisible line. And once I crossed it, there'd be no way back. I could hear the strain in his voice, not regret, but the weight of someone finally choosing not to run anymore. The truth is, he hesitated, searching for the words. This, whatever it is between us, it's the only thing in my life that feels real right now. Something in me tightened, not because I didn't believe him, but because I did. He let the silence hang for a beat, then took a breath like he was bracing for impact. "And I tried to push you away so I wouldn't have to admit that." I was about to speak when a sharp knock hit the door. We both froze. I opened it just enough to see who it was. Collins again. The same neighbor who had shown up weeks ago, his timing uncanny in all the wrong ways. "Evening," he said, leaning casually on the doorframe. "Everything all right in here? Saw someone come in just now." Alex didn't move, but I could feel him tense behind me, like the air in the room had thinned. "Yeah," I said quickly. "All good, just catching up on some work stuff." Collins peered past me, eyes landing briefly on Alex. "Work stuff this late, huh?" His tone was light, but the question lingered heavier than it should have. I didn't give him a chance to keep fishing. "Long day. We'll keep it down." He smiled, the kind of smile that says the conversation isn't over in his head, and walked away. When I closed the door, Alex was standing by the couch, staring at the floor. "Sorry," I said, though I wasn't sure why. "It's not your fault." His voice was tight. "I just hate how fast it all comes back. That feeling. The one where people look at you and think they've got you figured out in 5 seconds. He sat down, leaning forward, hands clasped. "I've lived too many years making sure no one could read me. And here I am, letting someone see more than I've shown anyone in years. And it takes one knock on the door to remind me why I stopped." I sat across from him, the quiet between us taut but unbroken. "I'm not asking you to change that," I said. "I'm asking you to believe that whatever version of you you're afraid for people to see, it's not something I'm going to run from." He looked up, eyes searching mine like he needed to measure whether I understood what I was saying. "I'm scared," he admitted finally. "Scared that if I let this keep going, I'll lose control over how the world sees me. And scared that if I stop, I'll lose the only place I feel like I can breathe." The words hung there, raw and unshielded. "You don't have to choose tonight," I said. "But you can stop pretending it's not there." He leaned back slowly, the set of his shoulders easing just enough to show the edge had softened. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said, quietly, "I don't want to keep running from it." Something shifted in the air, not loud, not dramatic, but definite. We didn't rush into more words. We didn't need to. The confession was enough to change the shape of the silence between us. After that night, nothing was official. We didn't define it. We didn't sit down and agree on rules. But something shifted. At work, the formality was still there for everyone else. Titles, meeting protocols, the kind of polite distance that made us blend in. Yet between us, the old unspoken walls weren't quite as high. He'd pause at my desk a little longer. I'd catch his glance across a meeting table, a flicker of something that wasn't there before. It wasn't a game. It wasn't hidden either. Just careful. Some mornings, we'd meet for coffee before heading in. No talk about us, just quiet moments over steaming cups, a rhythm we didn't need to explain. At night, sometimes he'd text, not with emergencies or confessions, just simple lines like "still awake?" or "long day." I'd reply, and sometimes that was enough. Other times, he'd show up. When he did, the dynamic was nothing like the first nights. He didn't sit on the edge of the couch like a man ready to leave at any second. He stayed. He let the silence work for us instead of against us. It wasn't about closeness you could measure in inches. It was about a space where neither of us had to perform. But one night, the quiet got tested again. We were mid-conversation, nothing heavy, just the kind of meandering talk you fall into when the clock has lost its meaning, when the knock came. 3 quick raps, then silence. We both froze. I opened the door a fraction, and there he was again, Collins, The neighbor who always seemed to appear at exactly the wrong time. Evening, he said, leaning on the doorframe. Haven't seen you around much lately. I kept my tone casual. Work's been busy. His eyes shifted past me, landing on Alex. Still working together late, huh? Alex's body tensed in that almost imperceptible way I'd learned to recognize. A tightening of the jaw, shoulders drawn in just slightly. Yeah, I said quickly, just wrapping up some things before tomorrow. Collins lingered, clearly curious. Then, with a nod, he stepped back. All right then. Have a good night. When the door closed, Alex let out a slow breath he'd been holding. I hate that feeling, he said quietly. I know. It's not even about him, Alex continued. It's about the years where people didn't ask, they decided. And once they decided, it was like my say didn't matter anymore. I sat back down. You're not there anymore. This isn't that. He looked at me for a long moment, as if measuring whether to believe it. Finally, he sat too. The conversation picked up again, but softer now. I didn't push him to talk about it. He didn't need a speech, just a proof that the night would keep going, unbroken. And that was the difference now. He wasn't here to escape something. He was here because this was where he wanted to be. The fear didn't vanish, but it didn't send him running either. Weeks passed like that, small moments strung together into something steady. A quiet understanding, a shared orbit. We never said we were together. We never told anyone. But when he walked into my place without knocking one Thursday night, carrying 2 takeout bags and a tired smile, I realized we didn't need the words. He set the food down, took off his coat, and sat beside me like it was the most natural thing in the world. I still don't know where this is going, he said. Neither do I replied. But I know I don't want it to end. Then it won't. It wasn't a promise carved in stone. It was something quieter, but no less certain. 2 people choosing, again and again, to show up. And maybe that was enough.